Alabama, a name that carries stories older than the United States itself. Imagine a land once ruled by powerful native nations who shaped its earliest identity. A land where European explorers marched through forests searching for glory. And a land that later became the center of some of the most important battles for freedom and human rights in world history. This is a state where the first capital of the Confederacy stood, where Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat, where thousands marched for justice from Selma to Montgomery, and where rockets were built that would one day carry humans beyond Earth. Alabama's history is not just a timeline, it is a journey of conflict, courage, innovation, and transformation. And today, we're traveling through that entire journey. Welcome to the channel, and thank you for joining us. If you love learning about the real stories behind famous places, the hidden facts that shaped nations, and the events that changed ordinary lives forever, then you're in the right place. In this video, we're going deep into the history of Alabama, not just the dates and names, but the emotions, moments, and turning points that formed the state we know today. We'll start long before Alabama became a state, when indigenous cultures lived in harmony with the land. We'll follow European explorers as they entered the region and forever changed its future. Then we'll move forward through statehood, the Civil War, the rise of the Civil Rights Movement, and Alabama's surprising role in America's journey into space. By the end of this video, you'll understand how one state became a symbol of both struggle and progress, and why its history continues to influence the world even today. So sit back, relax, and let's begin the incredible story of Alabama. Long before Alabama had borders, cities, or the name we use today, the land was home to thriving indigenous societies whose stories stretch back thousands of years. These early inhabitants were not small groups wandering through forests. They were organized nations with complex cultures, skilled craftsmanship, and deep spiritual traditions. Archaeologists have discovered mound sites, tools, pottery, and community layouts that show how advanced these cultures truly were. The people who lived here built villages along rivers, created trade networks that connected them with other regions of North America, and developed farming techniques that supported large communities. Among the most influential groups were the Cherokee, Creek, Choctaw, and Chickasaw. They had their own languages, political systems, and rich oral histories. The land we now call Alabama was divided by natural regions, mountains in the north, fertile plains in the center, and coastal lands in the south. These environments shaped the lifestyles of each nation, influencing what they hunted, grew, and built. Nature played a major role in their daily lives. Rivers like the Tennessee, Coosa, and Alabama were vital for travel, trade, and food. Seasonal cycles guided farming routines, religious ceremonies, and cultural traditions. These nations lived closely with the environment, taking resources carefully and respecting the land that sustained them. Their societies also included skilled artisans, storytellers, musicians, and leaders who guided their people through peace and conflict. Their knowledge of medicine, agriculture, astronomy, and engineering was passed down through generations. Although much of their history was never written on paper, it lives through artifacts, oral traditions, and the heritage that still influences Alabama today. The story of Alabama begins, not with colonization or statehood, but with these resilient, indigenous civilizations whose presence laid the foundation for everything that followed. The arrival of Europeans in the 1500s marked a dramatic turning point for the land that would one day become Alabama. In 1540, Spanish explorer Hernando de Soto led a large expedition through the region, searching for gold, power, and new territory. His journey was not peaceful. The expedition demanded food, labor, and resources from indigenous communities, creating conflict and fear. For native nations, the sudden arrival of foreign soldiers, unfamiliar animals, and powerful weapons was shocking and disruptive. Although De Soto eventually left the region, the impact of European contact was long-lasting. New diseases brought unknowingly by explorers spread rapidly among indigenous populations. These illnesses, which native communities had no immunity against, caused devastating losses. The balance of life that had existed for centuries began to change. Over the next 2 centuries, different European powers took turns controlling parts of Alabama. The French were the first to establish real settlements, including the important post at Mobile in 1702. They built forts, traded with indigenous nations, and tried to expand their influence. After the French and Indian War, control passed to the British, who ruled the region briefly before losing it to Spain during the American Revolution. Each power brought new systems of government, religion, and trade. They also competed for alliances with native nations, sometimes causing conflicts between tribes who had previously lived in relative peace. European colonization introduced new crops, tools, and animals, but it also disrupted cultural traditions and created tensions over land ownership. By the late 1700s, the future of Alabama was tied directly to global politics. European empires fought for control, indigenous nations fought for survival, and American settlers began moving closer toward the region. The world of early Alabama was becoming more complicated, and the changes happening during this era would reshape the land forever. As the 1800s began, the region that would become Alabama was on the edge of transformation. American settlers were moving in from neighboring territories, drawn by rich farmland, plentiful rivers, and opportunities to build new communities. The U.S. government negotiated treaties, often unfairly, with indigenous nations, acquiring more land for settlement. This expansion created tension, displacement, and new conflicts, especially with the Creek Nation, which still held large parts of central Alabama. One of the key turning points was the Creek War 1813–1814, a conflict involving Creek factions, American settlers, and the U.S. military. After the war ended, millions of acres of Creek land were taken by the United States, opening the door for rapid settlement. Towns grew almost overnight, roads expanded, and new political structures formed. In 1817, the U.S. created the Alabama Territory, separate from the Mississippi Territory. Population growth was so fast that only 2 years later, on December 14, 1819, Alabama officially became the 22nd state of the United States. The early years of statehood were filled with political debates, economic decisions, and rapid development. St. Stephen's served as the first capital, but the population soon shifted, and the capital moved to Cahaba, then Tuscaloosa, and finally Montgomery in 1846. Each move reflected the changing needs and growth patterns of the young state. Agriculture quickly became Alabama's economic backbone, especially cotton. Large plantations developed, relying heavily on enslaved labor. This shaped the state's social and political identity, creating deep divisions that would eventually contribute to national conflict. Statehood brought opportunity for some, hardship for others, and major transformation for all. Alabama had entered the Union with promise and potential, but the choices made during this early period would lead the state toward one of the most turbulent chapters in American history. By the mid-1800s, the United States was deeply divided over slavery, states' rights, and the future of the nation. Alabama, like many southern states, depended heavily on enslaved labor for its agricultural economy. Tensions continued to rise until 1861, when the first states began leaving the Union. Alabama joined them, officially seceding on January 11, 1861. Shortly afterward, the newly formed Confederate States of America chose Montgomery, Alabama, as its first capital. For a brief period, Montgomery became the political center of the Confederacy. Delegates met, drafted laws, and elected Jefferson Davis as the first Confederate president. Powerful speeches, military planning, and diplomatic efforts all began in Alabama. When the Civil War erupted, Alabama sent thousands of soldiers into the Confederate Army. The state did not see as many large battles as others, but it played a critical role in producing supplies, iron, food, and materials that supported the war effort. Cities like Selma became major industrial hubs, building weapons and resources for the Confederate military. The war brought devastation to families, communities, and the economy. Many towns faced shortages, inflation rose dramatically, and enslaved people sought freedom by escaping, resisting, or joining Union forces. As the Confederacy weakened, Alabama experienced raids, destruction of factories, and military pressure. In 1865, when the Confederacy collapsed, Alabama faced a new and uncertain future. The end of the war ended slavery, reshaping the social structure of the state. Reconstruction would bring new laws, new rights, and new conflicts, as Alabama struggled to rebuild physically, economically, and politically. The Civil War left deep wounds that would influence the state for generations. Alabama's role in the war, from being the first Confederate capital to its industrial importance, became a defining part of its historical identity. When the Civil War ended in 1865, Alabama entered a complex and difficult period known as Reconstruction. The entire state faced the challenge of rebuilding communities, repairing the economy, and redefining social structures in a world without slavery. Freed African Americans sought equal rights, education, and opportunities that had been denied to them for centuries. Meanwhile, many white citizens struggled to accept the new social order and the power shifts that came with it. The U.S. government placed Alabama under military supervision to restore order and ensure civil rights laws were followed. During this time, African American men gained the right to vote, and many were elected to public office. Schools for black children and adults were established, often supported by freedmen's organizations and churches. These early steps marked important progress, though they were often met with resistance. Economic recovery was slow. Plantations struggled without enslaved labor, and many people, regardless of race, faced poverty. Sharecropping became common, trapping many families in cycles of debt. Railroads expanded during this era, helping connect Alabama to national markets, but industrial growth was still limited in the early years. By the late 1870s, political control shifted again as federal troops withdrew and Reconstruction ended. New laws and state policies reversed many of the rights gained by African Americans. Segregation, voting restrictions, and unequal treatment became deeply embedded in Alabama's legal system. Despite these challenges, African American communities continued building churches, businesses, schools, and cultural institutions. Their resilience preserved traditions and created strong social networks that would later become vital during the civil rights movement. Reconstruction was a turning point, a time of hope, conflict, and lasting change. In the late 1800s, Alabama began shifting from an agricultural state to one with growing industrial power. The most dramatic example of this transformation was the rise of Birmingham, a city founded in 1871 at the intersection of major rail lines. What made Birmingham unique was its abundance of natural resources: iron ore, limestone, and coal, all found within close distance. These materials were essential for steel production, and their presence turned the region into an industrial center almost overnight. Factories, mines, railroads, and steel mills sprang up rapidly. Birmingham grew so fast that it earned the nickname the Magic City. People from across the country, and even overseas, moved to the area seeking jobs and opportunities. By the early 1900s, Birmingham was one of the fastest-growing cities in the United States. At the same time, other parts of Alabama continued to change. Textile mills opened in smaller towns, providing new employment options. Agriculture remained important, but technology and industry were beginning to take a larger role. Railroads connected Alabama to new markets, allowing goods to move quickly across the region. Life for workers, however, was not easy. Many laborers faced long hours, dangerous conditions, and low pay. Racial segregation affected every aspect of life, with African American workers often receiving the hardest jobs and the least protection. Despite these challenges, communities built schools, churches, and neighborhoods that strengthened cultural identity and social support. Industrial growth brought both progress and struggle. It helped rebuild Alabama's economy after the hardships of the Civil War and Reconstruction. It also set the stage for future developments in science, technology, and manufacturing. The rise of Birmingham symbolized Alabama's ability to adapt, transforming from a rural economy into a modern industrial force. As Alabama grew in the early 1900s, social divisions also intensified. The state developed new industries, transportation networks, and business opportunities. But these advancements existed alongside strict segregation laws that shaped daily life. These laws required separate schools, public facilities, transportation, and neighborhoods for white and black citizens. They limited voting rights, access to education, and economic mobility for African Americans. This era, often called the Jim Crow period, affected nearly every part of Alabama's society. Despite these restrictions, African American communities built strong networks of support through churches, civic groups, newspapers, and local businesses. These institutions became safe spaces where people could organize, educate, and strengthen their families and communities. Education played a major role in this period. African American teachers and leaders worked tirelessly to create schools, even with limited resources. They emphasized literacy, history, and community pride. Meanwhile, white leaders prioritized expanding public education for their own communities, reflecting the inequalities of the time. Economically, Alabama remained a mix of farming and industry. Many families in rural areas struggled with poverty, regardless of race. The Great Depression of the 1930s made life even harder. Farms failed, factories slowed, and unemployment rose. Government programs like the New Deal provided some relief by building roads, schools, and public facilities. Despite the hardships, seeds of change were quietly growing. African American leaders challenged unfair laws in courts. Community groups began organizing for equal rights, and younger generations grew more determined to demand fairness. Tensions built over decades, creating pressure that would eventually erupt into the powerful civil rights movement. This chapter of Alabama's history was difficult and often painful, but it also revealed the strength, resilience, and determination of communities who refused to stop growing, learning, and fighting for a better future. The mid-20th century placed Alabama at the heart of one of the most important movements in American history, the Civil Rights Movement. This struggle for equality, justice, and freedom transformed not only the state, but the entire nation. Many of the movement's most iconic events took place in Alabama, drawing worldwide attention and creating lasting change. One of the earliest turning points was the Montgomery bus boycott in 1955. After Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on a city bus, the African American community organized a 381-day boycott of the bus system. Led by local churches and a young Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the boycott became a powerful symbol of peaceful resistance. Eventually, the Supreme Court ruled that bus segregation was unconstitutional. In Birmingham, peaceful protests in 1963 were met with harsh responses, including police dogs and fire hoses. Images of these events shocked the nation and highlighted the need for civil rights legislation. That same year, the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing killed 4 young girls, a tragic moment that strengthened demands for justice. Perhaps the most defining event occurred in 1965 during the Selma to Montgomery marches. Activists demanded voting rights, marching from Selma across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. When peaceful marchers were attacked by law enforcement on Bloody Sunday, the incident sparked national outrage. Thousands joined the movement, and the marches continued until they finally reached Montgomery. These efforts led directly to the creation of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, a landmark law that protected the right to vote for millions. Alabama's role in the civil rights movement changed the course of history. The courage displayed in Montgomery, Birmingham, and Selma became symbols of hope, strength, and the ongoing fight for human rights around the world. After the civil rights era, Alabama entered a new period of transformation. Industries evolved, cities expanded, and the state began investing in science, technology, and education more than ever before. One of the most important developments took place in Huntsville, often called Rocket City. Huntsville became a major center for space exploration during the Cold War. Scientists and engineers at the Marshall Space Flight Center developed rockets that helped launch astronauts to the moon during the Apollo missions. This brought new jobs, innovation, and a high-tech identity to the region. Today, Huntsville continues to lead in aerospace research, defense technology, and advanced manufacturing. Other parts of the state also saw major growth. Automobile companies opened large factories, bringing jobs and boosting the economy. Universities expanded their programs, attracting students from around the world. Agriculture remained important, but modern farming techniques made production more efficient. At the same time, Alabama worked to preserve its cultural heritage. Historic sites from the civil rights movement were protected, museums were built, and communities celebrated the state's deep musical traditions in blues, country, gospel, and jazz. Sports culture grew stronger too, with college football becoming a major part of the state's identity. Modern Alabama is also working to improve healthcare, education, and infrastructure. Cities like Birmingham, Mobile, Montgomery, and Tuscaloosa continue to develop downtown areas, technology hubs, and cultural districts. While challenges remain, such as economic inequality and rural access to services, the state continues striving toward progress. Today, Alabama is a blend of old and new, a place where historic struggles shaped national laws, where scientific innovation reaches into space, and where communities work to honor the past while building a stronger future. As we look at Alabama today, it becomes clear that its past continues to shape its identity, not as a burden, but as a powerful reminder of resilience, change, and potential. Alabama's history is filled with dramatic chapters, from ancient indigenous cultures to civil rights battles, from industrial growth to aerospace achievements. Each chapter has left a mark on the state, building a story that is both complex and inspiring. The legacy of the civil rights movement remains one of Alabama's greatest contributions to the world. The courage shown in places like Selma, Birmingham, and Montgomery helped transform global conversations about justice and equality. These cities are now visited by people from around the world who come to learn, reflect, and understand the importance of human rights. At the same time, Alabama continues to innovate. Industries such as biotechnology, aerospace engineering, renewable energy, and automotive manufacturing are growing rapidly. Huntsville's scientific community pushes boundaries in space research, while Birmingham's medical centers make advancements in health and research. Culturally, Alabama remains rich with music, literature, food, and traditions that reflect its diverse population. Festivals, museums, historical landmarks, and community events keep the state's heritage alive. Families pass down stories, schools teach about the state's struggles and victories, and young people look toward the future with hope. The challenges Alabama faces, including improving education, supporting rural communities, and expanding economic opportunities, are real. Yet the spirit of the people continues to guide the state forward. Alabama's story is not finished. It is still being written every day through innovation, creativity, and the strength of local communities. The future of Alabama holds promise, grounded in the lessons of its past and carried forward by generations determined to build a more united, educated, and prosperous state. As we reach the end of this journey through Alabama's past, one thing becomes clear. This state is far more than the events that shaped it. Alabama is a story of people who built villages along ancient rivers, who survived the challenges of colonization, who fought through war and loss, who marched for dignity and rights, and who pushed science and technology into the modern age. Every chapter, from its earliest indigenous civilizations to the breakthroughs of Rocket City, reveals a place shaped by resilience, determination, and the belief that progress is always possible. Today, Alabama continues to grow, learn, and redefine itself, carrying lessons from its history into every new achievement. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If this deep dive into Alabama's story inspired you, make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video with